Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
Cameron, we have a perennial problem in question, and everybody listening to this does also. And the question is, how do you decide what's worth commenting on? And there are a number of things that have happened in the last several weeks that are hilarious to sad to flamboyant to wrong to whatever. So this is a little bit meta in the sense of we're commenting on how do you decide what to comment on. But I mean, a lot of you have asked us, like, how do you guys decide what to talk about on the podcast? And so when I'm saying what to comment on, I'm thinking about things that people post, not just on social media, but you're sitting around with your family at the workplace. How do you decide whether something in the news catches your attention and is worth you forming an opinion on it? Cameron, you had give us the wording of your most recent social media post. How did you word it?
Yeah. So I'm not on social media very frequently, but this time I broke the silence. I just said, a reminder that not every swelling controversy demands your opinion. So a number of you are going to call me out now and say, hey, and here you are on Thinking Out Loud, and you're going to give your opinion. How's that for a double standard? Fair enough. Fair enough. I accept.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that, have elicited strong response. You watched the Olympic opening ceremony.
Yes, absolutely.
Give me your 30-second description of the stuff that people may have found controversial there.
Well, there was the tableau. And you notice, Nathan, that suddenly everybody is an expert art historian magically within the span of since the opening ceremonies. Everybody suddenly understands Greek mythology and knows art history really well. Look, let me just make a few general remarks that are almost certainly going to annoy some of you, and that's okay. But just to get them out there, so there's this whole dispute that's arisen now. Is you think it's the Lord's Supper? You ignoramus! Obviously, this is Dionysus. This is Greek mythology. Just look at this painting. What is wrong with you? Let me disabuse you of the notion. And of course, we can also say, why not both? Because it clearly is both. It clearly is an ode to both of them, and there were explicit statements made from people behind the scenes of the pageantry that this was referencing the Lord's Supper. So clearly both are happening there. The other remark I'll make is that it was strikingly banal to actually see it. Now I will be the first to admit that I do think that there are many aspects of this that are
describe what you mean by that a little bit more.
Really do
give us more there. So you
sure,
watched it live.
Yeah, so some of it, I watched it unfolding live, and there were some, in real time when this is all happening, you see a torch being handed off, you see all this elaborate staging. Here's the Eiffel Tower, and here are a bunch of people parading around in grotesque costumes, underdressed and dressed in the wrong kind of clothes. And it reminded me, I thought, what is this? A picture of a hazing ritual at Boston College or something? I mean, there's just something very underwhelming about all of it. And I know people are going to hear that and they're going to say, oh, you are downplaying. Look at the degree of decadence. Look at the degree of sheer sexual deviancy on display at the Olympics. I mean, the Olympics, this is supposed to be something about celebrating all cultures, and yet this is making an obscene mockery of Christianity. I mean, I hear all of that. Part of me also just wants to say, yes, but I mean, again, we talk a lot about how culture is increasingly post-Christian. So I'm having a hard time understanding where the shock is coming from if people who are post-Christian in their disposition act like people who are post-Christian. And that's what we're seeing. Now, I'm not saying that this is, so I mean, let me just leave it there for right now. I said what I said. I meant what I said. Qualifications can always be added, but I'll stop there, Nathan. Right. I'd love to hear you weigh in a little bit too.
Well, let's run with this a little bit. So I think, I remember the first time that I popped out of a subway in Europe and hit street level and saw a billboard, and I was like, that billboard would not be allowed in the United States. So there's some significant.
So now remember, Nathan, real quickly. Well, can I interject there real quickly just to confirm what Nathan said? So I grew up in Vienna, Austria. Same thing. I mean, I remember, I don't know if I've mentioned this on Thinking Out Loud podcast, But I mean, I remember a particular. So I'm not going to name the company, but a particular brand of athletic shoe. The advertisement in Austria was a woman running wearing nothing but the shoes. And this was just
Right.
part of
Yeah.
the scenery of my life growing up. So, I
And that was
mean,
what, 20 years
Europe,
ago?
for those of you who have not been, yes, right. So, for those of you who have not been to Western Europe, this is really what it's like on the ground there.
Okay,
Continue.
so so be careful here when you're listening, because there's nothing about this that came out like, oh, it doesn't mean anything. It's, it's normal. It's just cultural. We're not
Oh
saying
no,
that
not
at
at
all.
all.
Yeah, yeah, no,
No.
at all. We're just saying that sometimes the shock that we experience is because we do still live in a culture that's very different from that, and that's one of the indicators that as a nation, I think a lot of the Christian influences still are at play, and a lot of things that your kids don't see on billboards going down the road. Um, all that to say is, so you can look at that and you can shake your head, and we'll throw in our classic thinking out loud line here. So get your little bingo card ready that you can be sad but not surprised. Um, but I
Yep.
guess for me then, so yeah, I'm like you. So, quickly this hits the headlines, right? This is the Christian scandal of the time. Everybody's commenting, everybody's outraged. We're going to boycott the Olympics. All this. First of all, no, you're not. You're not going to boycott the Olympics. I bet you aren't. And second of all, there's nothing you can do
Expand
about
on
this.
that for just a second.
On which part?
What do you mean? Yeah, I mean, so, well, you're not going to boycott the Olympics. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I want to hear a little bit more about what you mean by that.
All right, go look
It's helpful, yeah.
at, spoiler alert, it's already happened. So Noah Lyles wins gold in the 100 by the closest margin ever. Is it 5,000s, 10,000s of a second? Like literally by a nose.
Something like
It's
that.
a phenomenal athletic. I mean, in all across all sorts of disciplines, there's some just phenomenal racing in humans who have been training for decades, at least to perform in singular races, whether it be track or just pure sport, that you're really throwing out the baby with the bathwater if you're not at least slightly interested in just some phenomenal. And we could talk about why the Olympics has its own allure. But okay, second of all, the Olympics doesn't care what you think about it or its opening ceremony, and that's why the apology that they offered was a not apology. It's like a sorry if you were offended, but life is going to go on. And so this is the thing I think for Christians is like what you think about it, and that you have, get all riled up about it. People are going to care and care and care and care continuously less. Like France's Olympic Committee does not care what you post on Facebook about whether or not you feel offended by some, well, I don't even know what kind of Smurf that is, in the Lord's Supper. Like it just doesn't care. So, get. I guess is that part of like the shift as Christians in the mindset that we have to embody, Cameron, is that the world doesn't care about you being offended. So deal with it. That sounds harsh to say it in that way, but it's like we have to. You're not in Kansas anymore. Like it. So when I
want
say
to press
how do we
into that
decide
for a
what
second because you're right.
How we decide what we get fired up about, like you're kind of showing your cards as not in tune with where the world actually is. If you think that your outrage means anything other than virtue signaling to your fellow Christians that you're a good person. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but it kind of feels like that.
That's well said.
Help.
No, but it's part of the feel on the ground, the quiddity, to use a philosopher's dry term, because Christians in America, we just are not used to being marginalized figures in the sense that we're viewed as culturally remote or relatively insignificant, and in some cases, we act. People do actively really discriminate against Christians. There is increasing prejudice against Christians. That's true. That's part of what our post-Christendom moment looks like. But the feel of that on the ground, it's going to take a long time to get used to that. And one of those items would be, we don't care what you think. I mean, you're irrelevant anyway. Who cares? You're tied to this Bronze Age kind of morality, and the world has grown up. Why don't you grow up? But yeah, you can whinge all over Facebook. Now, again, this all sounds really harsh, but we're playing devil's advocate here for a second. This is why you want to choose your battles carefully. First of all, we need to pause and consider, what does it mean when people say something like, we can't afford to be idle anymore. We need to stand up and do something. We need to ask ourselves very clearly, what do you mean by that? I mean,
Well,
do you mean making your opinion publicly known, or do you mean something more drastic than that? Because I mean, then we did a series on Christian nationalism and some of those impulses. But we have to think about what it means to be viewed as cultural pariahs, and we need to make our peace with that. And that's a process that will not happen
yeah.
overnight. That's part of what we have to be prepared for. Yes.
Well, but I think too, Cameron. So let's look at a moderating line here. It's like if this happened in your neighborhood, Christmas parade, probably going and saying something would make a difference. I mean, they're like on the local level.
Absolutely, yes.
What the Olympic Committee in a different sovereign country does, there's that. I was thinking, you remember the story our friend John Jarogi told one time of after a conference, or I forget what he had given. He was talking to another guy
This is
about
classic.
sexual. This is classic. Talking to another guy about who definitely had a different perspective on sexual ethics than John did. And so they were kind of talking at the philosophical level about identity, sexual ethics. You can imagine the conversations that's happening there. Well, the whole time they're doing this, and John's a Christian, right? I mean, wonderful guy. We love him. He said the whole time there's this little lady standing there, like tapping her foot, basically saying, "You're not telling him the truth. You're not telling him the truth. You're not telling him the truth." And John's like, I was trying to get at I wasn't dodging anything, but I was trying to set it up in a way that this guy could understand where I was coming from. And he's like, so finally, this Christian lady has annoyed both of us that he just said, I just stopped and said, okay, will you tell him what you think is the truth? And she said, well, the Bible says, and he goes, woman, I don't give an F what the Bible says.
Yep.
And he said her face just turned white and she turned and walked away. and he's like, that's the like, and so
to me, there's lesson.
Is a harsh lesson there
one.
Yeah. So what do you do if the people that you're trying to argue with don't give a rip about what you think, what's your opinion, and what the foundations of your morality are based on? And so there's a little bit of that I see at play here of, are we just enjoying getting worked up?
And
about
that's where
something?
Well, that's where we need to think like missionaries again. And that's why, so what Nathan and I would not tell you, and we've said this on numerous other podcasts, is that there's some big temptations that come along with that territory. You can either try to run in I'm going to adapt the gospel and make it more palatable. There's a big difference between translating for somebody and capitulating for somebody. If you're translating
that's a good
gospel, you are doing your best to, you're doing your best to be persuasive, and you're doing your best to make it legible and understandable to them, sometimes on their own terms. I mean, the classic example, there are two great places to point to in the New Testament. I mean, there are many places, but two places I like to look at are Acts 14 and then Acts 17. What's really neat about that is you get two very different kinds of audiences. This is why I like to, this is not me, by the way, I'm drawing from other commentators who like the contrast, because in Acts 14, Paul is in Lystra, you help me out here, Nathan. Lystra? I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. We'll go with that. He's there. He's speaking to blue collar kind of people, and so he uses a lot of agricultural metaphors, and he draws on their mythology, using agricultural imagery to make God as creator comprehensible to them. Because remember, they were performing miracles, and the people see this, and they start to try to worship Paul and Barnabas. And they stop them, and then they begin to offer an explanation. In Acts 17, they're with a very different audience. They're with cultural influencers and philosophers and poets. And then in that setting, Paul quotes from two pagan poets. And he's doing the same kind of thing. But again, so he's not adapting the gospel. There's no capitulation going on, because he points to the altar to the unknown God and then moves to Jesus. Yeah.
Well, so the thing is, John and that lady agreed 100%. And I'm sure John had given talks that used that lady's reason. Like they were totally on the same team and had this total same way of viewing the issue. And the heart of the woman was good. I think she believed what she knew was true and wanted to engage in that and be helpful. And so it's not a critique of that. So yeah, I think that's helpful, Cameron, to say that when we recognize this is not a call for withdrawal at all. It's a little bit more of like,
No, and if you,
where are you going to
yeah,
spend your energy and how are you going to engage? And so that's why this loops us all the way back to where we started of like, for thinking out loud, how do we decide what to talk about and not? Because goodness, there's a
hmm
lot going on out there, but we have to think through, is that worth the brain space? Is that just a type of another thing? Or is this something that's indicative of an actual like
yep,
deep cultural premise and a seismic shift in the thinking in the direction that we're headed culturally? And how do we work with that as a Christian? Um, or is it just another,
right, yeah.
so
Well,
that's
one
where
of
I get
my
tangled up in.
criteria, Nathan, for well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this a little bit is because if something really captures the imagination of the public, and but also especially the church, these are our brothers and sisters. I'm interested in it. Then I'm interested in why it catches on like wildfire, and this was one of those. Yes, this was just one of those items that became very, very a huge topic of conversation very quickly. And so that was one of the so I thought, why are we so interested in this, and why are people walking away with such strong emotions from this? I mean, one thing that also point out is that this is a great opportunity for conversation. You can look at
Mhm.
it like that as well. We could, I mean, talking about the scene of the Lord's Supper, or why Christians would hold that to be a very sacred artistic depiction. These are all great topics of conversation, especially with people who are of a more pagan persuasion, or who have, let's face it, most people don't have a whole lot of knowledge about, I mean, social media space notwithstanding, most people don't know a whole lot about art history. And so
Mhm.
this is I mean, a lot of rich conversations could come from this. All I'm saying is sometimes if we immediately do the whole I'm really angry, I'm outraged, then what happens is we get separated into our little kind of polemical circles, and it becomes much more of a political debate, and it short circuits good conversations. So
Well,
that's another way to think
there's
about this as well. You can actually, yeah.
okay, but for the person who says you're not being pragmatic, you're not thinking about this. Like, all right, let me go pragmatic on you here for a second. So, do you use the term? I don't know how Georgia does it. Um, do you ever hear the phrase "Don't let someone get your goat"? You ever heard this? It's like, don't
Oh
let them
yeah,
get to
sure,
you,
yes.
or yeah, so don't let them get your goat.
hmm
And there's the phrase, I don't know, Grandpa says sometimes, like, if you don't want someone to get your goat, just don't tell them where you keep it tied. um, there's a little bit of a sense of like, if you see something like this opening ceremony that was intentionally intended to poke you in the eye, and then you
Oh
go
yeah, it's a
nuts
provocation.
over it,
Yeah,
it's a provocation. But like the degree to which you jump at the provocation is the root of the success
yeah,
of the provocation. And so there's a little bit of like,
right, exactly.
um, I remember this is a story I tell of like standing around some guys after church, and this little boy ran up and kicked me in the shin, and I didn't even look at him or pay any attention. And then he fell down on the ground. He's like, "I'm going to tell my dad what you did." I was like, "Yep, do that. Run off and tell your dad you kicked me in the shin so hard it hurt your foot." And then he took off and then stopped. Like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. You know, there's a little bit of a sense like,
Yep,
can the
yep.
church just be steady enough that when something like this happens, we roll our eyes and keep on with our conversation, and we don't have to go,
Yeah.
code red on the whole. Um, so I don't know, because some people are going to listen to this and say it sounds like I'm saying it doesn't matter, and it does mean
I think they're
something,
going to
but
think
it
we're both
doesn't.
saying that. And
Yeah, but
yeah,
it doesn't
sure.
mean as much as um like the structure. Yeah, I don't. I really don't feel like I'm speaking out of two sides of my mouth here, but I'm not articulating well what my position on this actually is, to say that, yeah, this is ridiculous. And I expect there to be ridiculous things, and I don't lose sleep over ridiculous things because I'm focused on other things. I don't know how to do better than that.
Well, I mean, I think also you just there is a one of the features of the social media landscape, for instance, is that these news items quickly mutate into springboards for self-expression. And this is where I think the whole thing can get very
Mhm.
fruitless. So instead of really being, now I'm not, I don't have access to different people's hearts, so I don't know the motivations, of course, and I don't pretend to know the motivations behind people's postings. But you know, there's a good chance that a lot of people aren't too concerned necessarily about cultural decadence, or aren't maybe they're more interested in making sure that they get their opinion out there, that they post their take. I'm always suspicious when somebody says a lot of people have asked me for my thoughts on this. I always want to say, I
Yeah.
maybe this is just because I'm a cynic. Or really, how many people have asked you? Like maybe one person said something, or did did you just sort of infer that people would be asking you? But because I noticed also what sort of annoyed me, Nathan, were there were a number of different Christian public intellectuals of various, various statures, and I understand this. I mean, people are interested in what some of these figures think, but of course, they all had to weigh in, and then they all had to walk their words back. Some of them more gracefully than others. Well, certainly does seem to be that there is a clear reference to Dionysus here, and yes, with this it is a compelling comparison when I look at this painting and all. I mean, but I just thought, you didn't have to say anything in the first place. I mean, you could have it. It's okay to refrain from commentary, to just sort of to kind of add on to what Nathan was saying as well. It may sound like we're saying this isn't that significant. In one sense, we are, I think. So
Well,
yes,
let's put it
is
this way.
culture around us increase?
I
Yeah.
think you see this, but I think you see this a lot in the life of Jesus, is that he had a clarity about his mission and his vision and his purpose and who he was, that he did not have to jump every time that a dog barked. And so I think that's where
Yeah.
it seems to me
I
that
like that.
there's a sense of like, you know, some little dogs in the world are doing a lot of barking that make Christians do a lot of jumping. And it comes across not looking like you're righteous or that you're even correct, but that you're insecure. I don't know. Maybe that's too cynical of a read, but there's a
Let
sense
me
in which help me.
I think I can work with this a little bit, Nathan, because yes, I think part of what you and I are trying to gesture at is that you don't want to grant more power to evil than it needs to
Yeah, I think
have.
that's
Evil is purely, yeah, I mean, evil is derivative. Look, even some of our greatest stories, like fairy tales, and even, just classic films understand this, this villain, this evil villain only has as much power as you grant to them. If you give them your fear and your reverence, they grow more powerful. Obviously there's a measure of truth to that. And here I always find Jesus's attitude toward Satan and his minions very eye-opening. And indeed,
I
the
like it.
tone of the Gospels. If you look at the way, if you look at the way demonic possession is treated in there, I mean, it's there's almost a sort of, the word isn't, yeah, it's dismissive. And I imagine Satan finds that highly, highly offensive. But yeah, it's got a dismissive kind of attitude of, I mean, you're
Not
nothing.
ignored,
You're
not
defeated.
ignored, but
No, I'm
as
not.
if the
No,
power is
not
not
ignored.
equal.
There's a real, I mean, and now we want to be, there's a balance here. I like how Screw Tape Letters opens. They're with a quote basically saying there are two major mistakes you can make with regard to supernatural evil. You pay it too little attention or too much attention. You want that balance. But yeah, if we serve the King of Kings, we have nothing to worry about. We're concerned, we're invested, we're saddened, but we don't need to be led by shock and outrage. That's the way of the flesh. That's the way of the world. That's not the way of the church. I think that might be my final word on I guess that tone thing.
Yeah. So I guess so are we able then to answer our question of how do we decide what we comment on? So think about this. If you think about the triumphal entry, there were a lot of other temples and shrines that Jesus could have gone and wrecked when he went into the city. Why does he go to his house?
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had to think in my mind through how do I decide what I comment on and what I talk about and what concerns me, where are the worries, that's more and more in the direction of like, how does this influence the church? Can the church be faithful in the midst of this? Can we think clear-headedly about this in order to be kind of a platform of stability for kind of a weary and lost world? How do we maintain our identity and our stability in order to be an open-armed group of people who are really trying to engage with the complexity of the world as it is? And so those are the things that I tend to gravitate toward in my mind. Another one, Cameron, Olympics, gender, sex, boxing, um, intersex, transsexual, sexual dimorphism, like all the, so you very quickly, again, you have an instantaneous response. And then there's like, okay, now that we've commented, let's go back and try to figure out what's actually going on here. Um,
What's
and
actually
so
true?
we
Make
have
sense of the
to,
facts and the data as it comes in. Yeah.
right. Yeah. And so you can, because I see this happening on both sides of one person saying, no, this is, clearly um, the abuse of women. And there's a history of, you can read all the articles say like women have to prove that they're female and this is part of the patriarchy and all of that, which is ridiculous because there's a serious difference in this athlete. On the other hand, this athlete is not transgender, doesn't try to manifest, from birth. I think you have probably a legitimate case of intersex here, but on the same, like has a Y chromosome, which is a phenomenal advantage when it comes to boxing and contact sports. And so the truth is very complicated here. And I think there is an unfair advantage there for
Mm-hmm.
sure. I also don't think that it's a massive cultural statement of somebody, trying to take, because we've seen that in a lot of other sports where, to be clear, like it was definitely a guy who's just trying to act like a woman to win. Um, I don't think that's what was going on here. And so everything does not have to be the
Right.
maximum good or bad in every category at all times. And so I think that's where I want to see the church have some kind of um, moderation, or like act
Stability.
like you have enough
Yep.
heft, like you have enough mass that you don't get blown around by
Mm.
every single little whiff of an idea that comes around. And so that's not to say that you don't notice it and that you don't respond to it. And maybe you'll even need to comment on it. But actually, I mean, that's biblical language, not being swayed by every, idea that's out there. So
Yeah.
I I
It
guess it
certainly is.
concerns
Yeah.
me because it makes us look like lightweights when I think the church really is the 800-pound gorilla, figuratively speaking, when it comes to
Right.
producing lives and culture and systems of worship that are really good, long term, and very stable for everybody involved and associated. So, um, yeah, I think that's my.
I think part of what we come back to this time and time again, Nathan. We have all the resources we need in the church. I think we need to hear that over and over again in North America because we've been so concerned with fitting in. And so we've wanted cultural capital. Well, we've lost that cultural capital now. And the truth is cultural capital can be a helpful thing, influence and all of that. It can be used for the good. Absolutely. So, getting legitimate cultural influence and making a positive difference in your culture, yeah, I'm for it. But when it's no longer, if you come to a juncture where it's no longer possible and you have to pay a higher and higher price to do it, then we need to be willing to admit, well, it's a luxury, but we don't need it. We have a wealth of resources. Look, Christ, his word, his people, that is all we need. We don't need the cultural goods to be legitimate. We have all that strength already. We are the 800-pound gorilla. I need to hear
Mhm.
that from time to time. And that's I
Yeah.
like the word heft. I like that we have that strength and that heft.
Well, and you get
We
that.
just
I
some
mean,
of
that's
us
a
we
that's
need
the
to be reminded.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the kabod, the weight of glory, the Old Testament
Right.
idea of, actually, C.S. Lewis's little sermon, "The Weight of Glory," is a good one to look at there. But I think too, Cameron, that I was trying to remember what year it was. You and I, it was before a presidential election. So was this 2020 or 2016? I think it was
Hmm.
2016. We did a podcast
2016.
live in Florida. Remember that? Um,
Oh
yeah,
yes,
man,
I
that seems
remember
like
that.
forever ago.
Yeah. So this would have
And
been
and in there,
2016, I think. Yes.
yeah, we came to a statement of saying that we need to be very careful about demonizing other people, because biblically speaking, there isn't a redemption arc for the demonic. And so there's,
Yeah.
what I mean by that is that
We didn't
let's
say that.
form
You said that.
opinions.
That's a very good quote. Don't give
Okay,
me
I said it.
credit.
I
Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. I was putting you in there in case it was wrong. I could, divide up the
Oh, you could
guilt there. But
you got to take
my
some
idea.
blame. No, it's good and it's you.
Yeah. So right, like, so there isn't a story in scripture about how demons are saved. So when you demonize somebody,
Yeah.
you're consciously or subconsciously putting them in a category that say they're beyond redemption, they're beyond hope. God can't save that
you're
person.
beyond the pale. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think what is it about us that we look at something like a boxing match and we say, oh, like that's brutal. That's difficult. That shouldn't be. And at the same time say, you know what, if that woman, if that boxer, pick whoever, were a member of my church, how would I counsel
Yep.
them on how to live well, given the way that they were born? If somebody, and so to be thinking missionally for the person because they matter to Christ, if that is where we're coming from, then I think that'll deeply moderate how we talk about things. And so if you really do think
Well
that
said.
there are people who are unredeemable and beyond the pale, sure, mock them, do whatever, but you aren't doing that Christianly. And so there's the world, I think, is longing for a witness for people who can actually look at things that are bad, that are misguided, that are tragic, that are vulgar. And I keep coming back in my mind over the last week to this little phrase in Timothy. At one time we too lived in malice and envy, being hated and hating one another. Like that's who God built the church out of. And my dad was saying this recently, like apparently Christ can build a church out of prostitutes and tax collectors, but he can't do it out of the self-righteous. I mean,
yeah,
fill in the blank there,
yeah.
Skippy. Where do you want to be on this? So it's not to say that Jesus did not have clear standards about what is right and wrong, what is decent, what is sexually permissible, what is honoring, glorifying God. It's just that he was willing to take. It was the people who thought they had it all together who were kind of too stuck in it to see what was really going on. And so I can't find a way other than the model of Jesus to at the same time say that Jesus was harder and more brutal and more strict and more clear about ethics and behavior and holiness and purity and glorifying God, and simultaneously expanding the invitation to join him to more people. And so I can't find any good examples outside of Christ. I recommend Jesus here as an answer to where we're going on this, because I don't see another way out of this, or we're just going to continually preform our little categories, and then we're going to be looking for datum points to drop into our see, I told you I was right. This is what's wrong. Here's a good example of why I'm right. Here's an example of why I'm right. And we're not really engaging any of the ideas deeply. We're just using those as little pats on the back to feel right and justified in our own eyes and in the eyes of our friends around us. So I don't know. I rest my case there. I don't know if we helped here at all, or just made things worse. But I really do think there's a deep need for all of us to individually, before the Lord, ask whose image we're being shaped and formed into, and what we say, who we say it to, what we laugh at, and who we grieve for are deep indicators of the core of our heart and where we are before the Lord and other people. And so there's, you can go back and look at your, last 3 months of online activity and decide, what does this say about what I think about who Christ is and what other people are and what God's heart is for a broken world. And it's a good little checkup for me there. And I hope it is for those of you listening as well. For those of you who have something you'd like to sort us out on, feel free to join TOL Connect or send us an email at info@toltogether.com. We're fellow pilgrims with you on this journey of trying to figure out how to live well. Livable Christian hope is what we're interested in. And so we appreciate your thoughts and comments and suggestions and corrections and feedback and encouragement and wisdom along the journey on that. But thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.